Our next presentation is going to be a panel discussion on the Living Labs rotational grazing best management practice. The panel will be moderated by Andrea McKenna, Executive Director of the East Prince Agri-Environmental Association. She is joined by Ryan Barrett, who will provide an overview of the results to date, and then Nick Green, a participating producer, will talk about BMPs from his perspective. Andrea McKenna is the Executive Director of the East Prince Agriculture Environmental Association, a nonprofit organization made up of 15 forward-thinking farm families located in central Prince Edward Island. With a background in business and passion for connecting people, Andrea has led key agriculture initiatives across Canada, including the most recent one, the Living Labs Initiative for Agriculture Research. Named one of the most influential women in the Canadian agriculture in 2021, she is now co-chairs the National Network for Living Lab Leaders, driving collaboration, innovation in farming across the country. She also gearing up for the first International Living Labs meeting with partners in Europe. Andrea and her family own and operate Bunnyborough Vegetable Company Limited and Dialed In Precision Ag Incorporated, bringing cutting-edge precision agriculture technology to PEI farmers to support variable rate applications that help farmers save money and the environment.
That was more of an introduction than I was expecting. I thought we'd shorten that a lot, actually. Okay, so it's my pleasure to be here and to moderate this next session and talk with Nick and Ryan. Ryan, you need no introduction, not just because you had one a few minutes ago and after your talk, but I think in this realm, in this industry, you really don't need any introduction. You've been working alongside farmers for, what's your guesstimate, on how many years?
10 anyway.
10 plus years, for sure. God, I've been around that long. It's got to be longer. Anyway, and doing, of course, excellent work in the industry for not just potato growers. Even though you're with the Potato Board, you've done work well beyond the potato industry. Nick, Kingston View Farms, a third-generation beef farmer. Right now you're a commercial cow-calf producer. And you've adopted grazing management on your farm and min or no-till farming practices, and that's what we're going to talk about here tonight. So before I even get started on this session, Emily was so nice to put together some questions for me, but she should know me better. I don't really ever follow script, so I will go off script immediately. And I just want to talk for a second about Living Labs before we get into our discussion, because I think I'd rather open it up and talk just more about sharing some ideas. So for anybody that knows me, and roll your eyes and it's like, oh my God, Andrea, Living Labs. Yes, Living Labs has now been around a long time. We're going on maybe our 7th year, I think, of running Living Labs for PEI. And it's not new. It's, been around. Ryan's been working with farmers, alongside farmers in their fields forever. I'm looking up, I see Tyler sitting there. Tyler's been, when I first arrived in PEI, you were one of the first people that we started working with because you were boots on the ground on the farm. So it's not new, but we have a structure around Living Labs. It's a termed concept now, and a lot of money and effort being put in by Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada to support this initiative. And what we were really successful in doing in Prince Edward Island was building a very, very broad network of people to work together to support farmers. So our Living Labs network in PEI continues to grow, and we continue to make really good connections with so many folks at Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada who we get to see more often face-to-face and out on our farms with us. And when we're in meetings, our provincial government, so many of you, as I mentioned, have already been out in the fields, but now we're connecting with not just the farmers, but with AAFC. We're connecting with our private agrologists and other partners. We're connecting with our watershed groups. We're connecting with private companies who are supporting agriculture. So all of that being said, it's it's really important. I think it's a very important initiative. Secondly, I applaud our federal government for coming out with the off-CAF program. So we're always used to having the cost-shared programs between the federal government and the provincial government, and now we have the off-CAF program administered by the Federation of Agriculture, and that program is trying to put money in the farmers' hands so you can adopt the practices that we're out there working with you and working alongside with you to show that these practices work or don't work, or try to figure out what they are, and secondly, to be innovative and try to come up with new ideas. So then we have the funding program there to try to support that. So I just want to give you just quickly from my perspective, and it was just mentioned in that bio, that we now have a national Living Labs network. So while PEI, we were the first to get off the ground, we were the first to really establish and build a successful network for Living Labs. Every province in Canada has a Living Lab now, and I co-chair the National Living Lab Leads Network. So now we're cohesively trying to work together, share ideas and our innovations, and do more networking as a country. And secondly, we also have our European network that we work with, and we also have a US network, the LTAR network. Although the LTAR network, I'm not sure in what state they are in right now under Donald Trump. They are certainly not allowed to talk about climate change or climate solutions, so I'm not really sure what our partners in the US are experiencing at the moment. We haven't had a meeting lately. But we're definitely continuing to collaborate and with our European network. And in October of this year, I'll have the opportunity to present at that international forum in France. And I'll get to meet some similar groups, some farmers who are working as you are in the Living Labs programs. We'll get to a closer look at the innovations that they're working on and the things that they're exploring in some other countries. So I think that's really important to know that, when you're part of a network here in the province, you're part of a national network and also an international network. And a lot of my attention, thanks to the wonderful help I have with my staff, I can focus on kind of the bigger and broader picture these days. So all that being said, tonight we're going to talk about rotational grazing with Ryan and Nick. Nick, I'm going to circle back to you for a moment because Nick is like, yeah, Living Labs. I wish I never heard the term because from the minute you were introduced to the program, I feel like we have been nonstop. We have conversations in our office when somebody asks, like, can you identify somebody who could speak, whether it's on one of our national calls or give a presentation, and of course you come front to mind and you never say no to us. So we're always in the office saying, don't ask Nick, go to anybody else, don't ask Nick, because I feel like you've done so much for us over the past year. But you do say yes, because you are a really good champion. You're a very good speaker. You've spoken to so many different audiences over the past year, almost 2 years now, about your experiences, and it's impactful. So I want to thank you for being part of the Living Lab, for continuing to work with us and continue to take on these speaking engagements. So I'll just start with you, and you know what, I won't stick to the scripted questions. I'm just going to ask you, what's your experience been so far?
So thank you for that introduction. You're probably going to jinx me now. Terrible speaker, but it's been great. It's a way to, put a trial that you have in your head and you want to collaborate something together and get the rest of the facts and figures and the science behind it. These are the folks that help put all that together. Most of us don't particularly like that part of trials, and we all want to try something and get data behind it, but it's the collection and analyzing and putting it down to paper is the part that's, I find, the most painful anyway. And they really help organize that, and they find the people in the different areas and strengths, like Ryan as an example, to collaborate with and help you put those things together. So for me, it's been a great experience. So I've got nothing bad to say. It's been all positives.
And Ryan, you mentioned in your presentation that you're participating, you've led a lot of our Living Labs research trials. That's no coincidence. It's because you've been doing the work for a long time, working alongside farmers. You have great ideas, but you really understand the execution piece, and you have excellent working relationships with growers. and with so many people in our industry. So maybe just talk a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, it's been a really great opportunity to provide some stable funding and an extended network to get trials done. As Nick just said, like sometimes you have an idea for a trial, and if you're just doing it on your own, or if I'm just doing it within AIM or within the potato board, you know, there's a certain amount I can do. I can do a certain amount of soil testing and harvest sampling and that sort of thing. But then if we can leverage more people and more dollars, we can do a better job, and we can get a more fulsome data set, and we can hopefully increase the replication, and also at the end of it, hopefully have better answers. And so in the first Living Labs, we worked a lot on cover crops and full season crops. This time, we're kind of going that next level. We are doing some cover crop work, but we're looking at rotational grazing. We're also looking at nitrogen credits from legumes. And these were all ideas that we kind of had before, and things that we wanted to work on before. Like even I started working with Nick and a couple of the potato growers before Living Labs on this grazing stuff, because, you know, just as simple as we had a speaker come in from Alberta who said he was working on rotational grazing in potatoes, and we had Craig McCluskey, he was at that meeting. He said, I should try that. And he just one of his neighbors is Nick, and he said, oh, this might work, and we fleshed it out, and we tried it, and put a trial together, and then thankfully we had Living Labs to underpin that and to be able to do a better job of it than we would have done just on our own, I think. So, and instead of just doing one trial with Nick, I'm actually doing 3 trials with Nick with 2 different potato farms, and then I'm working with 2 other potato farmers as well. So we're able to, kind of expand that data set a little bit.
Yeah. I often get asked the question, how did you come up with your projects? And I say, well, we didn't. We kind of just been building on, and this was right from the first Living Labs when that was introduced, and we were putting together a proposal. I remember we sat around the table in Kensington and we talked about, what are you doing? What's Steve Watts working on? Judith was already out in the field working with farmers. So instead of coming up with new projects, we really just took what was already ongoing and worked it into Living Labs. And what you just described was exactly the same thing with rotational grazing. Lucky for us, in second Living Labs, it was, that ACS focus, and rotational support was there for rotational grazing. So, and that's what we're continuing to try. It's like, we want to take new ideas. We want us to keep having dialogues and talk about, new things you want to try, but also if there's things that you have been working on, or somebody, even if it's, a private company's been working on something and really want to get out there and try it with farmers, then we're the conduit to do that. I just want to talk on one of the values I really see with the Living Labs, and we definitely stepped it up as an organization, the East Prince, with Emily Bellevaux as our KTT specialist, but it's helping get the message out. So you're doing the research and you're collecting the data, and you do a really good job with your structured meetings in the wintertime and your AIM meetings, and you always draw a good audience. We can always count on the PEI Soil and Crop, the Potato Expo, but it's kind of all the in-between. We've even moved away from trying to do just our own meetings. Although plug in, we do need to do one in April where we can really bring all of our partners together with some farmers and do some brainstorming. But at the end of the day, we're really just, again, trying to support you and all of our leads on these trials to get the message out. So let's talk about that for a minute, on how important it is to talk about the knowledge transfer piece.
Yeah, and we can do many trials as we want, but if we don't focus on getting the information out to the end users, then we may as well not do the research. Yeah. So from the beginning of any of my programs, it always talks about we're trying to do trials. We're trying to do trials that we think the growers want us to be working on in the first place. And then if we're working on what the growers want us to be working on, then hopefully they're going to be thirsty for the results. And then we'll have to focus on how to get those results to them in the best way possible. And some people like coming to meetings like tonight. Mm-hmm. Some people don't. We're not 300 people in here tonight. Yep. But some people want a fact sheet. Some people want a Facebook post. Some people want a video that we can, record and share. Some people want a actual 10-page report they can leaf through in the wintertime. So we try and, at least for me, I try and kind of hit all of those as much as we can. Just try and be multimedia and multi-approach in terms of extension, because everybody integrates information in different ways. Some of us are visual learners, some of us are experiential learners, some of us are verbal learners. So it's just about trying to manage that, and instead of trying to just force one way of doing things. And again, one of the good things about Living Labs is that when we're working with producers, for some producers, that's the best way of them, for doing it on their farms with them.
Yep.
They have an investment in it. They want to know if it's working or not. They want to see whether or not something they're going to continue or not. So we're not guaranteeing that it's always going to work, and we're not guaranteeing that we're always going to come
Yeah.
up with the right answer. And sometimes at the
learning
end, sometimes it's, well, maybe, but at least we worked on it together, and we're going to share with you everything we know.
Yeah, that's it. And that two-way dialogue is so important to capture there. Nick, the province, working with the province and with OFCAF, you recently hosted a tour, grazing walk. What was it? What was the official title on it?
Winter grazing walk.
Yeah, the pasture walk. Anyway, huge success. You had a huge turnout that day. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, just to go off of kind of what Ryan was saying, you have all these little outlets to touch points with people, and then once you get those kind of filled up, people like to talk, and that's the rest of the knowledge transfer. It's getting all those little outlets filled in, and then people can, well, what's going on there? I seen this, I seen that, and then it spreads kind of amongst the community, which is good too. And the live demos are good, like when people come out to farm tours and they get to see kind of hands-on. And I've always said the on-farm trials, I think, hold, and this is nothing against trials that are done in a very segmented non-farm scenario, but on a farm, lots of things happen. They don't always go perfect, so it's more realistic and relatable to anybody that's running a farm. It's like, you know what those challenges are, and you know that trial has faced those same challenges, so it tends to hold a little more weight in that respect. So, it allows you to fill those gaps that are kind of perceived by other trials, right? So it does a lot for that. And then, like Ryan said, after you fill all those voids, and people have that and they take it back home, it spreads the word too.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And there's a lot of value in doing the trials, like on the research farms and in the labs. But if we can replicate that and also kind of coincide with a field trial, I agree. And that's what I keep hearing from growers who participate. It's like, that's my reality. And as Ryan just said, we don't always get it, and maybe the results don't work out the way we thought, or maybe the whole trial goes down the poop chute because reality happened, So, but that's all part of the learning, and that's really what the Living Labs is about. It's about, getting out there and trying to fit all of the pieces of the real world and that reality in to get the best data we can and use it. The next question I have is kind of around how has working with farmers and researchers has it changed any of the planning that you've done on your farm? So I'll kind of direct that at you, Nick.
I would say it's helped me more than anything. It's, you learn some things by interacting with different people and different skill sets. So there's a grand opportunity there just to take all the different people you get to work with in Living Labs and all the specialties that they bring in. I use Ryan as an example because he's such a wealth of information in himself, but you get to tap into a lot of those resources which can help you in your own operation regardless of what you're doing, right? So that's knowledge transfer in itself to anyone that's involved in these directly. The knowledge transfer goes both ways.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's a big piece of it too. I've learned lots of things just about how trials work and the functions and the do's and don'ts. You talk about hiccups. We had a few hiccups too. They happen. It's learning that and adjusting to it. So lots of knowledge back and forth and lots of people to tap into, the resources that you normally don't have at your fingertips that you can, and that helps a lot.
Do you feel any less stress when you have those big hiccups, knowing that you've got so many people you can call on now? to bounce ideas off of or to get help?
Yeah, I guess you know, they're used to it, right? So, you know, when we had our first big hiccup, I talked to Ryan, I said, well, this happened. He's like, okay, well, this is our pivot. This is what we can do. We can salvage this part, that's a write-off, but this will work, right? So they're used to that, and they understand what it's like to work on a farm, so they can help you manage that. And it's, you know, it's not like, oh, this is a write-off, I can't believe we did a trial with you, this is a waste of time. You don't get any of that. It's like, okay, how do we salvage what can make the trial work and what can't? And everybody takes away a bit of learning experience, and you move on.
And sometimes the trial can't be salvaged.
Yep.
Not referring to Nick, but sometimes I have trials that sometimes it can't be salvaged, but they'll inform the next trial. So it informs the grower, okay, you know, a lot of time it's down to communication. So it's just about, you know, both sides have to own that in terms of improving communication and understanding when things have to happen or not happen. Understanding just always the biggest problem with trials is the check. It's really easy to say we're going to make this change on the field.
Yeah.
It's always the hardest part to say, and I need you to leave a few acres where we're not doing that.
Anything.
And especially in grazing, that is really, really hard. Because those cows go into that field and see a bunch of stuff that isn't mowed and on the other side of a fence, and they really want to go eat that. So putting in checks and putting in relevant checks is hard, because again, like in these trials that I'm going to show you a little bit of data on, most of the checks are strips or parts of a field. Ideally, we wouldn't have our check just in one place, because it kind of ties us into, is that field better or worse than the other part of the field? But you can't just have randomized check samples in a grazing field, right? Because you can't just say, well, I'm going to take a 100 by 100 square in the middle of this field and fence it off and not put cows in it, because the cows will get into it. You know, so it's just things like that we have to be in the realm of common sense, and we have to try to find a way to work with the growers and work with the livestock owners and just kind of figure it out. And sometimes it doesn't go 100% according to plan. And then we say, okay, well, how can we use that to make it better the next time?
And that's a good point that Ryan made. It's just, even if there is a hiccup, it's a learning point, right? It's, all right, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Set up for next year, set up for the next trial. It's still a learning point, right? It's not lost completely. There's still knowledge gained out of that, and what not to do, and you get better for the next one.
And in the setup, a lot of times when we've hit some hiccups, it's usually been in the setup phase, not usually at the end. It's usually towards the start, actually.
Yeah.
And in the start, well, okay, if we lost it, at least we got some soil sampling done, and we got some key learning, and we figured out what cows like to eat, and we figured out that we can't fence them this way. And so, yeah, there's lots of ways we can learn from these things, even if it doesn't 100% go according to plan.
That's yeah. So on lessons learned, just overall. So you've been doing trials for many years. You've been working in the living labs trials for, we'll say, 6 years for sure. Are there any lessons learned that you would take away, or things you would like to see changed as we move forward in this program? Try to continue to, you know, build this network, try to continue to innovate alongside of farmers and do these real trials.
Change in the program itself? Or
No, just in general, and how it's executed, or the program itself. And I think there's one thing we'd all like change about the program, and that's take that focus off the climate change specifically. But
I think in general, it's been going relatively well.
Yeah.
You know, I think this iteration, actually, the first iteration, there was almost a little bit of forced, what do they call it? Or what did Otto always like to call it? Where they were trying to get everybody to get, you know, iterative, you know, working together to, you know, make the project better all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was like, you can't force that. It kind of has to
forcing the
happen.
creativity. They were
It has to
forcing
be
it,
sort of natural. And as long as everybody's committed to that, I think you always have to assess, well, what worked and what didn't, and let's not do what didn't work. So I think this time around, it seems to be a little less forced and a little bit more natural in terms of giving us that ability to do that.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, I think it's a good program. There's challenges on a field scale doing the amount of replicates for some of the things like the modeling of like greenhouse gas emissions and stuff. I think it's important work to be doing, but it ties up a lot of money and a lot of resources. And I'm kind of hoping that as we go forward, we'll be able to use some of that data to then model these things so that we don't have to keep doing them all the time.
Yeah.
Because, like, you know, and I say this as the person who's not out collecting gas out of the gas chambers, and some of my Ag Canada friends up here that are, that, you know, are the ones that are out at 6 o'clock in the morning in Caskenbeck pulling, you know, gas samples out of fields. That's not a lot of fun, especially going there like every week. So some of that sort of stuff, you know, we have to do a certain amount of that, and hopefully we get some good data out of that. But I think we also have to understand that at some point, if we can get 85 or 90% of the accuracy with a good model, then I think we have to look at some of those ways, because we can't, you know, we can't use up 75 or 80% of our research funding just doing greenhouse gas sampling. So we have to try and look at, you know, and that also limits our ability to do replicates. Like
Yep.
in the first living labs, in some of like the cover crop work I did, Morgan and I were doing like 8 and 9 trials in one, or like fields in one trial. And this year it's more like, well, 4 is a lot, you know, because of all the other sampling we need to do. So again, it's trying to find the balance. It's not
Yeah.
much sense of doing a lot of fields if you're not getting good data out of them. But you also don't want to have too few, because if you have too few and 1 or 2 of them get kiboshed, or, you know, don't show good differences or whatever, or there's some other complicating factor, then you're just left with less reliable data. So it's about trying to find that sweet spot between in-field replication and across-field replication.
And that has been echoed right across the country.
Yeah.
I think that's been a pain for this program with every province, with every administrator. I mean, try being the administrator who has got to keep saying, no, I don't have enough money, I don't have any money, you need to take it down a notch. And then I've got the other side saying, we need those samples, we need all of that data. And then I'm telling you, like, okay, Ryan, fewer replicates because I can't pay you for any more. So it is, that definitely has been a challenge. But yeah, everything you just outlined has been brought up at the national level, and changes are slowly coming. So if there's not another iteration of Living Labs, hopefully we'll be over that hurdle and that headache. All of that being said, I want to talk about adoption. I found in the first Living Labs we were really pushing the idea, like, if we can get out and we can get in the fields and start doing on-field trials, there would be a lot of adoption. I think that's true, and I think that has been happening. In this one, we're really pushing more about the data we're getting, our measurements on the greenhouse gas side of things. But I don't want to move away from that adoption piece, because I still think that's extremely important. And I think it's important that you know, what we do in the field and what our neighbors see will start to spread. The cover crops is an amazing success story. The work that Nick and others are doing on the rotational grazing, the organized pasture walks have been fabulous. Do you think we're seeing more uptake from farmers based on kind of the seeing is believing and doing those tours on farm?
I would say yes. And there's a couple drivers probably behind that too. Economics are probably a big part of it as well. People are looking for, like Ryan had a lot of numbers behind, you know, his previous presentation there, and people are looking for that stuff too to make decisions. It's one thing to talk about it, but you do have to have that other piece to it, and people have to see how it really worked and how it happened and what was required to get it off the ground. Mm-hmm. So when you see, like, in addition to myself, there's 2 others that are in this across the island, which helps, you know, different areas too. So you can see that it's not just tied to one particular area or one particular type. We have basically 4 almost different models out of the 3 of us that are doing this, right? So very unique applications of the same process, but in a different manner in each one. So it gives people, you know, flexibility. It's like, well, it's not just this one canned approach. You've got multiple options, and they get to see that. So it's that helps in delivering that knowledge and that information.
And we saw good like when we did the cover crops in the last Living Labs, from when we started the Living Labs to the end, we did see a noticeable uptick in cover crops. Some of that is undoubtedly due to Living Labs, the research that we did. Not all of it,
No.
but
Yeah.
growers learn from each other too. But
Yeah.
part of it was likely due to that, and putting some data underneath this to support it, and that drives adoption. Now we're at an early sage with the grazing. This is our first potato year in the grazing project. But, I do a survey with my growers every year about BMP adoption and BMP interest. And I asked them, what's your level of interest in rotational grazing? And, I think we're about 50% said that they were either already doing it, very interested, or open to it with more information.
Yeah.
So, a couple of years ago when I asked that question, it was like more like 25%. So
Yeah.
I think with more information, there's more people who's like, okay, well, I'm not going to buy into it today, but I'm interested. I want to learn more. And that's what this is all about, right?
So doing it, the seeing and believing, Nick, you brought this up, it's getting the data out and letting people, see what the investment is, their time, their energy, the resources on the farm. How important is the profitability piece? How important is it that we do the number crunching and look at the economics of the trials?
I think that's the basis of it, really. I mean, nobody's going to implement something that makes them unprofitable. And there's more to that than you have to look at all the things like soil health, and in continuing, it plays into a profit part of it. And you have to measure that in your profit scale and the economics of it, because, just because you spent a little less to get a crop, but you put your soil back a year, you haven't really gone ahead, right?
Right.
So it's factoring all those factors in. And economics, to me, plays a big part of it. It has to make sense. It has to make sense for the farm, your soil, and all of those components. It's one thing to say, yeah, this is the best way to do something, or this is the best thing to do, but does it make sense? And if you put all that together and you can show that it does, and these are the economic impacts, and these are the benefits that you'll see over a period of time, like Ryan mentioned, in the early stages of cover cropping was, it's a slow moving needle, but then the needle moved, and it moved at a fairly steady pace after that. And that plays a big part of it. I found a lot of people's hurdle is just that. I didn't see significant changes in year one, so I'm not doing it again. And what I've said is, I've got a 3-strike rule, and it's something's got to work 3 times before you can count it in. It also has to fail 3 times before you can really count it out. And that's just my own rule. I'm not saying anybody should use that, but we get too many variables to count something out after 1 year. And you look at weather and humans and all of those factors. One shot, we get one shot at everything every 365 days.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like we can do 20 of these in every year. It's every 365 days you get to try this once.
And that's why it's going to be part of this network, so you can have those conversations. So you might be one farm, getting one set of results, but if we have multiple farms adopting the practice and showing different results in those conversations, so maybe one failure here, one failure, you know what I mean? It's not as much and grander, like you said, because you only have, one growing season per year.
You can move the needle faster in that sense. And then if somebody has something happening in their area, you can spread that knowledge to other people in the trial and say, hey, I encountered this in week 3, heads up, you might run into this if you get this weather event, right? So you can help model a lot of that stuff quickly across multiple people.
Yeah. Any comments on that one, Ryan?
No, I think he's largely said it.
Yeah, I think it well said, exactly. So you have some results that you're going to present to us.
Yep.
So maybe we'll move on to that piece and let you present the results. I'm going to say thank you very much to both of you for having this discussion, for participating, for Ryan, all the trials that you're leading and continuing to do a lot of work with the farmers, and Nick, for your continued very eager participation in so many things. You are really a role model for the rotational grazing. I thank you for participating in our events and what you've done with a lot of the partners. And a huge thank you to all of the partners who are participating in Living Labs and who are working alongside farmers, to help them bring their ideas to fruition or troubleshooting in the fields, and just to help solidify this network. Let's keep it growing, and most of all, let's just keep communicating so we can continue to share the ideas, share the data, and really make an impact with changes in agriculture. don't know if you want to do any questions now, or will you do your results and then we can go to questions?
Maybe I'll bomb through, I just have a few slides to give you a little bit of an overview of just, as I said, this is our first potato year in this trial. So Nick and other people ask me, well, what are we seeing? What are we seeing? What are we seeing? And you know, it's been early to share too much before now. So I wanted to share a few things. I will say, the reason it's preliminary results is on there for a reason. This is just a couple of fields in 1 year. We're not hanging hats on anything here. We're not getting too wild about anything we see here today. We're just looking for what we saw and what we see in trends and what spurs us on to keep looking, okay? I'm just going to skip this for the most part, but you know, why are we interested in this in the first place? Like, why are we talking about this? You know, and why are we talking about? Well, the beef industry is looking to grow in PEI, and they're looking to grow with how can they do that in a cost-effective, economical way. We have lots of potato acres that have forages in them in the year before potatoes, and I would say a good chunk of those, probably almost at least half, just get mowed and mulched and aren't getting baled or aren't getting fed to anything. So we have a potential that's already not, like, it's already being grown. Can we potentially use it for something? And so for the grower, for the potato grower, can we reduce that mowing and mulching cost? Can we return nutrients direct into the field in a composted matter through a rumen, which is nature's greatest composter? So how can we do that? How can we derive a value from that grass and legume rather than just mowing it? And how do we also, for the beef producer, how do we break some, you know, parasite cycles? Instead of grazing my animals on the same field over and over and over again and having, you know, issues with parasites and things, if I'm going onto a fresh field every 3 years or something like that, maybe that's an opportunity as well. So those are some reasons why we're looking at it. So what are we looking at in this trial? So we're looking at a number of things. We're looking at soil nutrient analysis. We're looking at soil health metrics using the provincial soil health program. We're looking at, of course, soil organic matter as part of that. The Agriculture Canada team is working with us on the GHG emissions part. And then, of course, we're looking at potato yield and quality. What I don't have on here is average daily gain and, you know, the weight gain by the animals, because it's hard to necessarily say that, because in one way we don't have a check for that. They're only doing it on the grazing part. But we will try and factor that into our reporting as we get through this process as well. And so we'll be working with the producers on that as well. So today I'm reporting on 3 trials. The first one is the one I did with Nick and with Craig McCluskey at Bluefield Acres. So you can see in the satellite image, there's 3 fairly distinct strips. So on the far right here, this is the grower's standard rotation. So 22, it would have been barley underseeded with red clover, and then it was red clover in 23, and then potatoes in 24. The middle, this was in 22, it was corn. Corn that was grazed, and it was grazed late. It was grazed like October, November, after Fiona, and a lot of it was knocked down. I didn't put any pictures in here, but those cows ate every bit of that corn. And they ate a lot more than I thought they were going to eat, so you could almost not even tell there was corn in there. And then 23, Nick put in like a direct seeded grass and legume mix with a few brassicas in it. It was about a, I don't know, 8 or 10 species mix, I think. And then that was, that was direct seeded and grazed. And then in this far left strip, so this in 2022 was sorghum Sudan grass that was grazed, and it was underseeded with like an alfalfa Timothy mix, mostly alfalfa. And then that was then grazed in 23. And then, as I said, the whole field was potatoes in 24. In 23, the cows got over most of this about 3 times. It was done, they weren't just turned in, they were done in segments, so done in sections up the field. So in a true rotational grazing standpoint. In 22, they were, how many times were they grazed on this side? A couple times? On the Sudan grass? Twice on the Sudan grass, and then of course the corn was just the once, and it was a late grazing opportunity. So, we soil sampled before, like at the start of every year in the spring before, so we did it before it was planted, before the trial was set up. We did it after the first grazing year in 23, and we did it before the potatoes were planted in 24. I'm going to show you a few graphs. Basically, my number one thing to tell you is that there was no significant differences. So nothing to say huge differences here. The organic matter I found was interesting. So you'll see the check, when we started the trial, of course, this is a big field, and we did it in strips. So at the start, that side of the field where the check was already a little bit lower on organic matter than the other two. Basically, they all more or less increased a bit, but the biggest amount of increase was actually in the check, which I found surprising, but it did increase a bit in the grazing Sudan grass alfalfa. It went down a little bit in the corn sort of direct seeded cover crop, but I can't be certain that, like, these are just trends. Easily, they're within the margin of error, so we're not, as I said, we're not going to get too hung up on this. We're just looking to see what we see on trends. But they all basically end up around the same thing, around, between about 3.2 and 3.3 is about where they end up. Potassium, very much similar type of trend. No big differences there. We get a bit of an uptick on the grazing treatments after the first year of grazing, but they all come down after the second year of grazing. Active carbon surprisingly went down on all three trials. I found that surprising. Went down the most in the grazing corn rotation. I think part of that is because there wasn't a lot of trash left over and there wasn't a lot of root mass left over after the first grazing year. And the second year, these two trials had perennials in them. So I think the perennials would have fed a little bit more active carbon than basically the 2 years of annual crops. But again, we're within margin of error here. I don't think it's too much difference. Respiration, same thing, very much within the margin of error, no big differences. Aggregate stability, this is basically a story of, in this case, again, we still end up in a similar place. The grazing corn actually did better than I thought, considering there was a fair bit of soil disturbance in this field from the cows grazing on a non-sod ground that actually ended up with a little bit of erosion issues, so the stability was better than I thought. It was lower than I thought in the alfalfa, but it recovered considerably after the second grazing year. But again, we're within margin of error here for sure. Biological nitrogen availability. Again, the two crops with perennials did better after the first year and then came back down to earth and then are basically all around the same place at the end. So those graphs, really nothing to say, nothing to hang your hat on and say there's any big differences, but this is just an idea of the type of information that we are collecting. On the yield side, we saw no difference in yield between the check and the grazing, the corn / annual forage mix. We saw statistically less yield where we had the grazing, the Sudan grass alfalfa strip. And I found that very surprising because if you look at this satellite map, this is an NDVI map from Climate Field View. There's a very obvious treatment effect here. This was taken in late August. The foliage, the potatoes were way greener in that treatment, and I thought, oh, they're really green. And when I went to the field, you could see it in the field. Actually, I don't know if I don't have a picture of it. Oh, I have it here. I don't know if you can see that on this picture, but right about here, I could see like this side is the Sudan grass alfalfa, this side is the corn, and the check is way over here. I could see it to the line in the field where one side was greener than the other. And I thought, okay, we're going to see some yield on this side. But then I thought afterwards, oh, right. Alfalfa mineralizes a lot more nitrogen than the annual legumes that were in the middle and the double cut red clover that was in the other side. And what I think happened, these were Alverstone russets that were grown for seed. They were top killed the first week of September. They didn't have enough time to finish off. They had too much nitrogen that delayed maturity. And we actually, if we had backed off the nitrogen and the fertilizer on that side, we probably would have seen more similarities in yield. So again, that's a learning part of this process. If you're going to introduce a crop in here that's not even across across the whole field, and you've got alfalfa compared to some of these other ones, alfalfa mineralizes almost twice as much nitrogen as some of the other legumes. So that's a learning that we'll have for another year. Not much difference in smalls though, or in total defects. So yeah, that was our biggest learning from that. So what's our take homes? Active carbon decreased in all 3 treatments, but it decreased the least in the Sudan grass alfalfa rotation. The organic matter improved in all 3 treatments. The respiration was highest after the first grazing year and before any tillage was done. So, I think tillage is fairly highly related to respiration. I talked about the mineralization in the alfalfa. What we're hoping to do with this field is follow this for another 3 years. So we're hoping that we can graze this field for 2 more years, this time with the same mix likely on the whole field, part of it not grazed and the rest of it grazed, and then look at it going forward and potatoes in 27. That's kind of the hope. Rainers up west. So this is the farm. This is a farm where Levi and Glenn have the cows and the potatoes. So we don't have to work 2 different people. It's all one shop. So it makes things easy for doing the trial. This field was potatoes in 21, and then it was I think barley underseeded ryegrass, and then it was ryegrass in 23. They took the first cut off the whole field, and then turned the cows in August on most of the field, and then left an ungrazed part. And we did the soil sampling before. You can kind of see on this map over here beside this hedgerow, that's our ungrazed check, and the rest of it's checked. The rest of it's grazed, except for this little place that's brown, and that is a manure pile. And then we actually set up a manure versus no manure check here as well. So the very far west of this field was no manure, and the rest of the field was manure. These were in a creamer variety, a yellow like mini variety, and again, it was managed for seed. Up west, especially in the Cascapeck area, was really dry. It did not rain here for about 6 weeks in August and September. They didn't even really need to kill these in August. They did, but they were largely dead on their own. One thing I can tell you, when we went in to dig this field, there was significantly more, to the eye, more weeds in the check than there was in what was grazed. So that was kind of an interesting observation. On the yield side, no significant difference. There's a little bit of a trend towards higher yield in the graze, but that's definitely within the margin of error, so we're not going to get too worked up about that. There was a significant difference between where there was manure and where there was no manure. So there was about a 30 hundredweight yield benefit where there was manure. I'm still working through some of the soil test data, but we did see the active carbon was about 15% higher where we grazed versus where we didn't graze. So that's interesting. I'm looking to see whether we can replicate that going forward. But it did seem to show an indication that we had a little bit more active carbon in that graze section. And we had lower residual nitrates in the grazed area post potatoes as well than where we didn't graze, which is good for an environmental standpoint. So this is another field that we're planning to follow for the next 3 years. It's going to be 2 years of grazing again, and then going into potatoes in 27. Rainers have also initiated another field that we set up this year. So this year, it was potatoes in 23. It was grazed in 24 with a check. It's going to be grazed again next year, and it's going to be potatoes in 26. And then our final one is we worked with Oyster Cove Farms. So that's the Ramseys up in Hamilton, and Beach Point Farms, which is Ian Lockerbie. So this was a field that was grazed in 23 and potatoes in 24. This field, kind of feeling our way through this trial. This is the first time that the Ramseys have done anything involving grazing before. And Matt very much took on the management of this trial for the beef producer. We had a big field, about a 40-acre field that actually was about 3 or 4 different fields kind of grazed together to make a good grazing block. But part of that meant that there's significant differences between parts of that. It's not really one field. We did good baseline sampling to try and capture that variation, but there's differences in crop rotation length and differences in species, between the different parts of that field, so that leads to some challenges. Also, only part of this field was in potatoes this year, so only about 10 acres, maybe even less than that, was in potatoes in 24. And it was really, really, really dry there as well. And so that had an impact on yield. This was the last field that they planted. It was probably planted a little bit later than you'd want for that variety. So we had a sort of depressed yield. And it was spring plowed, which also led to some issues with some sod and clumps and that sort of thing. Now that was uniform through the whole field, but it was a little bit of a challenge. The other thing I'll say is there were 2 checks in this field, but it was hard to keep the cows out of the checks. And one of the checks was like smack dab in the middle of the field and it wasn't very big. So trying to, target exactly where to do that greenhouse gas sampling and yield estimation and that sort of thing was a little trickier. Learnings for another time. Basically, no difference in yield or smalls. There was a borderline significant difference in total defects when it comes to the advantage of grazing. That is almost entirely scab. It's really hard to attribute scab to a treatment because scab can be so variable in a field, but we were sampling pretty close to each other in terms of where we were doing our check and grazed. So there may be a benefit for reduced scab where we had the grazing. I'm not sure, but that's something we'll have to look at another year. We're still working through the GHG and the soil test data. I've got a great folks from Ag Canada that are helping me with that data, and they did most of the collection on that sort of stuff, so big kudos to them and their team. So where are we? Next steps, we got 2 fields in potatoes in 2025. One of them, and both of them are with Nick. One's with Bluefield Acres and one's with Skyview Farms. One of them was just grazed this year, going into potatoes next year. One of them's going to have been grazed for 2 years going into potatoes. And as I mentioned, we have another field set up for 26, and hopefully we're going to be back into 2 more of these fields in 2027. And these weren't from a graze field, but I had to get shorthorns in here somewhere. So thank you to everybody, particularly the crew with Ag Canada, Kensington North Watershed for helping with some of the data collection and the harvesting this fall. Department of Agriculture also lent some bodies. East Prince Agri, of course, for their administration of the program. And also Emily comes to the field once in a while to help me with some sampling. So thank you for that, Emily, and all the participating farms. I think that's all I had for that. And anything else, Andrea? Any questions, I suppose? Nope. I did not do any nematode testing. No, I appreciate it. It's a good question. I did not do verticillium and nematode testing because my hypothesis is that there would not be major differences if we didn't change the species in the field. The only field where I would say there might have been a difference in vert and nematode testing is Nick's trial, where we had 3 different crops or 3 different crop rotations. There could be some differences there. I didn't do that, but we could go back this spring and do some follow-up testing and see what the population dynamics are. But any other questions? It's a little different at every farm. Nick had lines, so there's a well at that property, right?
Yeah, there's a well at the front.
Yeah.
Front of that property. So we had 3,000 feet of above ground pipe, and we just strung that down through the middle, and that was our watering points for that farm.
Yeah.
It's working really well.
Matt had sort of central watering places around a central alley, and he brought water over on a water truck. So that's how he managed water. And then Rayner's, the field was sort of behind their main farm and close to other fields they grazed, so they just extended their water line. Yeah, that's a good question. For anybody looking at grazing, that's going to be part of it, and that's why you need off-calf money to pay for water. So any other questions, comments, thoughts? All righty. Thank you very much for your attention.